Ladies and gentlemen. Let me tell you something, brother.
It's Talk Wrestling Live with Felix The Cat Katlovski.
It doesn't matter what your name is.
We heard rumbling. No. We heard rumors. Homicide. Conas. 5150 at LAX.
Listen live on Mondays at 4 p.m. on NorthCoastUnderground.com.
And follow us on Twitter at TWL 24/7.
I'm in no mood for your wisecrack. Let's get it on.
Hey everybody, this is Felix The Cat Katlovski, and it's been a while since I've been on the air with Talk Wrestling Live, but we are doing a new show today. We're going to pick up from where we left off, so bear with me because we are kind of far behind. I mean, I still haven't even seen WrestleMania yet, so I'm still watching that. But we're going to be focusing on Impact Wrestling. Last time I was watching, it was a special Against All Odds episode of Impact Wrestling. So let's get kicked off with the Fear After Dark report.
Are you scared? It's time for Fear After Dark.
I thought this was fun and games.
Fear is a funny thing.
En cero, miedo.
Fear was meant for the art of survival. I am the new beginning.
Because we are for Ohio. By Ohio. Because we are Ohio versus everything.
I'm better than every single one in that locker room. Tessa Blanchard is undeniable.
I'm not a man. I'm a machine.
So let's talk about what happened over there. So that show happened on March 29th, and we began Impact Wrestling, that Against All Odds edition, with LAX and Konnan that came to the ring, and they were there to confront the Lucha Bros. Now, while Konnan still considered the Lucha Bros and LAX family, he doesn't like that there's beef that's wedging them apart. From LAX removing the Lucha Bros masks to the disrespectful hand gestures that they got in LAX's personal space, like just putting their hands in their faces right there, that's disrespectful. I wouldn't do that. I mean, unless I'm trying to start an enemy, unless I'm looking for a fight. So Konnan, he warned all this beef would happen, everything would escalate if these two teams would wrestle, and they wrestled each other, and that's exactly what happened. So Konnan, he wanted to settle this business between both teams right now, and that sent the Lucha Bros running to the ring as a brawl shortly followed. And the fight ended very quickly as security pulled both teams apart, but it still wasn't enough. It just wasn't enough force to separate LAX and the Lucha Bros, as you had Pentagon and Phoenix. They superkicked two members of security, not listening to authorities, and just then LAX threw another referee to the outside of the ring on the Lucha Bros. But the Lucha Bros fought back. They were like tossing chairs at LAX, and it didn't stop there. Things escalated once again, with the Lucha Bros setting up two tables in the corners. But you had both Santana and Ortiz. They reversed the Lucha Bros' plans, while Konnan distracted the Lucha Bros, and it was the Lucha Bros going through the tables instead. And you had LAX holding up the Lucha Bros tag team titles, so you can see that LAX wants that gold, but how far are the Lucha Bros going to go to not let LAX get that gold? So as Impact Wrestling returned from a commercial break, we saw Santana and Ortiz. They were backstage, and Konnan was with them, and LAX said that the Lucha Bros broke respect, honor, and pride. So now, on behalf of LAX, Konnan challenged the Lucha Bros to a Full Metal Mayhem match on April 28th's pay-per-view at Rebellion, and they're going to be in Toronto, Ontario, Canada for that one. So next you had the Disco Inferno, Glenn Gilberti. He took on Scarlett Bordeaux in her Impact Wrestling in-ring debut, and Disco gave Scarlett one last opportunity to just call the match off, but Scarlett did not back down from this fight. Scarlett wore wrestling gear that looked like something Sable would have worn in the ring in the 1990s, and from then on, it was time for Disco Inferno, Glenn Gilberti, to take on Scarlett Bordeaux. So Scarlett was on the attack, and Disco quickly fled the ring, but he would soon return to get back at Scarlett, and I think he grabbed her by the hair, but he then kept on missing Scarlett Bordeaux with his fist drop and an elbow drop, and Scarlett just kept on rolling away to get out of the ring. But Disco pulled Scarlett by her hair again, and he tried to pull her back into the ring. But once again, Scarlett outsmarted Disco Inferno as she pulled down on his arm, and Scarlett hit a stunner and an impressive looking crossbody on Disco Inferno. But Gilberti was right back up, and once again, he was going at it with Scarlett Bordeaux. Now Disco just kept on stomping on Scarlett Scarlett when she was down, and Scarlett never gave up, and she just kept on fighting the pain as she managed to get Disco in the corner, and she applied that stink face to Disco Inferno. But I wonder if he just enjoyed it. I mean, this is a stink face, but it's from Scarlett Bordeaux we are talking about, not Rikishi. There'd be a big difference if it was from Rikishi. And we saw another stunner by Scarlett, but Disco, he continued fighting off Scarlett, and he hit a Village People's Elbow. It's like the People's Elbow, but it's Disco Inferno's version of it. And while Disco was going to hit the 10 punches in the corner, Scarlett outsmarted Disco again by low-blowing Disco and using a powerbomb pin to get the win over Disco Inferno. So Disco was humiliated, not just from the Disco sucks chants or the gobble gobble chants from when he lost that Eli Drake turkey trot and he had to wear the turkey suit, but now he lost to Scarlett Bordeaux, who proved that she could take on the men, like Glenn Gilberti, who likes to abuse women. With all the humiliation, Josh Matthews suggested that Gilberti should delete all of his social media accounts and crawl under a hole. But next we had Melissa Santos, the backstage interviewer at Impact Wrestling, and she asked Taya Valkyrie if she had a strategy against Jordynne Grace. And Taya said that she watched Jordan's match against Tessa when Jordan became Taya's #1 contender for the Knockouts Championship. And Taya said that Jordan may be strong, but she's not Wera Loca strong. And Taya then implied that Jordan was short compared to Melissa in height. And Taya said that she wasn't worried about her match with Jordynne Grace and that Taya would be leaving as the champion. Just then, you had Johnny Impact. He chimed in saying that it would be a good night, and after watching his wife retaining her championship, he would relax to some low-carb popcorn and watch Killer Kross break the machine, Brian Cage. So Johnny then took a shot at Brian Cage, saying that once you've had a concussion, you're likely to get more concussions. So you can see that Johnny Impact really wants Brian Cage to get hurt by Killer Kross. And Alicia Edwards and Kiera Hogan, they were making fun of Disco Inferno backstage, calling him a loser, and he told them to show some respect. Now, we were reminded about United We Stand, which took place on Thursday, April 4th. We'll be talking about that later. That took place in New Jersey. But we learned that Johnny Impact refused to team with Brian Cage and Moose, as well as Eddie Edwards. So that match became a handicap match against Drago, Daga, and Aerostar, as well as King Cuerno. So instead of being Team Impact Wrestling, Johnny Impact decided that he would be added to the Ultimate X match against Impact Wrestling's Jake Crist, Lucha Underground's Dante Fox, WrestlePro's Pat Buck, MLW's Cotto Brazil, and Lucha Libre Triple A's Jack Evans at United We Stand, which was exclusively on the Fite app. But there were several changes made to that show, and we'll talk about that later. But we're still talking Impact Wrestling Against All Odds edition. Now, we already knew that Taya Valkyrie would defend her Knockouts Championship against Rosemary, Jordynne Grace, and Katie Forbes for United We Stand. And of course, we had that Extreme Dream match with Rob Van Dam, RVD, and Sabu taking on the Lucha Bros. So some more things that a lot of the fans were excited about seeing for United We Stand. And then you also had that Monsters Ball match, which pitted Sami Callihan against Jimmy Havoc, as well as Rich Swann defending his X Division Championship and taking on Dragon Gate's Yamato. Now that match was changed, and we'll talk about that as well. But we also had that intergender match between Tessa Blanchard and Joey Ryan, and that was something a lot of people were looking forward to seeing. And I haven't seen this yet, but on Friday, April 12th, there was a Twitch special that aired live. It was called Salute to the Troops, and it took place from Fort Campbell Army Post. I'll try to watch that. And then on April 13th, there was another Twitch special. It was called Critical Transformation, and it took place in Kentucky. Impact Wrestling was partnering with UCW. I still haven't seen that yet, so I have a lot to catch up on, more than I thought. And then on April 28th, we all know that's Rebellion, the pay-per-view that takes place in Toronto's Rebel Entertainment Complex. And we saw a preview of the recently signed Josh Alexander. He's nicknamed the Walking Weapon, and we saw him in this factory with red lighting. He was just smashing TVs with a sledgehammer and throwing wooden pallets all around. And if you thought Killer Kross was scary, get ready for when Josh Alexander arrives to Impact Wrestling. Now, we reviewed the situation with Tessa Blanchard and how she was suspended for attacking the bell keeper, the timekeeper, but then She threatened legal action if Gail Kim didn't apologize for her actions against Tessa Blanchard, screwing her out of her Knockouts Championship back in January for Homecoming, and Tessa demanded that Gail Kim resign from Impact Wrestling for putting her hands on a performer. I mean, Gail Kim was just a special guest referee, and besides that, she was like a backstage role. She wasn't a wrestler anymore. Now, Tessa was backstage with Melissa, and Tessa said that she has Impact Wrestling management by the balls. I mean, Tessa brought up how many people would credit Gail Kim for starting the women's revolution in Impact Wrestling. And while Tessa called Gail a legend, Tessa said that legends come and go, but diamonds are forever. And everyone knows by now that Tessa is a diamond. And just as we thought that Tessa was finished with Melissa, Tessa reminded us that Gail Kim was in the building, and Tessa didn't want to wait for an apology from Gail Kim. Tessa wanted to take it. So we haven't seen RVD in Impact Wrestling in a long time, and while he competed at United We Stand, Impact Wrestling aired a clip of a documentary called Headstrong, which showed a clip of RVD during his time in the WWF and ECW, as well as RVD doing stand-up comedy and other parts of his life. And we saw a cameo for Madison Rain's return to Impact Wrestling with her unfinished business between herself, Su Yung, Tessa Blanchard, and the Knockouts champion Taya Valkyrie, as she made her return later that week. So then the Lucha Bros and Konnan, they crossed the line, and LAX would get their rematch, but the Lucha Bros said that LAX couldn't beat them because the Lucha Bros are the best tag team on the planet. So come Full Metal Mayhem at Rebellion, the Lucha Bros looked to beat LAX one more time. Now, Tessa was done waiting for Gail Kim's apology, and she called out Gail Kim to the ring. And Gail quickly came to that ring. Now, Gail apologized for attacking Tessa, and after a little nagging from Tessa herself, Gail apologized for costing Tessa her title shot, and she confirmed that she did turn in her resignation earlier that morning. And Tessa bashed Gail for being known for an era in women's wrestling for bra and panties matches, as well as lingerie matches and jello matches. And Tessa had an apology as well. Tessa apologized that Gail Kim couldn't compete in Tessa's era, and Tessa said that Gail couldn't lace her boots on Impact Wrestling, so Tessa wasn't sorry that she'll never have to see Gail Kim's face again. And just then, Gail announced that while she did resign, she also came out of retirement for one more match, and this time it would be in Toronto. So Gail took Tessa down and attacked her all the way to the outside of the ring and back. And we all saw the footage of Rich Swann retaining his X Division Championship in a match against Sami Callihan. But later, Callihan acted like a sore loser and attacked Swann after their match, and he brought a new friend to Impact Wrestling, and that's Madman Fulton. Now, Fulton is a giant compared to Willie Mack, and Fulton took him down like it was nothing. And then we saw new footage of Callihan and OVE in some undisclosed location, and they were kind of brainwashing Madman Fulton, and that must have been why they took him into their faction. Callihan said that they were just maximizing on Fulton's full potential and making him a monster. And OVE, they were just beating on Fulton like it was some kind of cult ritual or a gang initiation. And they made Fulton say that special catchphrase, everything. And that's when Fulton was introduced as the newest member of OVE. And we'll be talking more about Impact Wrestling when we come back from these messages.
Ride the winds, flying far and soaring like a hawk.
Run a marathon with the endurance of a tiger.
Swim across the ocean like a dolphin.
Beast Energy X. Do you have it in you?
Buy Beast Energy X at all Waffle Max locations and unleash the beast in you.
Join the Beast Energy X fan club and get free perks. Sign up by following us on Twitter at Beast Energy X.
Follow us on Twitter at TWL 24/7.
I'm not finished with you!
And now, let's get back to the show.
So we were just talking about that footage that we saw where Rich Swann retained his X Division Championship in a match against Sami Callihan. But Callihan acted like a sore loser and he just beat down on Rich Swann, and he brought a friend with him to the ring. And that was who we introduced to, Madman Fulton. And Madman Fulton, like I said before we went to commercial, we talked about how OVE, they were brainwashing this monster, Madman Fulton. I mean, as big as he is, I mean, he took down Willie Mack like it was nothing. But then he's over here being brainwashed in this undisclosed location by OVE, and they're beating him down like it's some cult ritual, and he just seems helpless right there. And you can tell that, like, he was being brainwashed because his face was being, like, put right in front of a TV that was, like, snow, like, staticky signal and everything. So you can tell they were brainwashing him. And they said that they were just trying to maximize on his potential. They really wanted to make this guy into a monster, and they just had to drive it into him. But then it was time for the Knockouts Championship match where Jordynne Grace took on Taya Valkyrie. And it was for the Knockouts Championship as well. I mean, Jordynne Grace became the #1 contender when she beat Tessa Blanchard, and now here she was getting her shot at Taya Valkyrie's Knockouts Championship. And both competitors were in a fierce matchup. I mean, we saw Taya Valkyrie, she used the steel posts on the outside of the ring when she sent Jordynne Grace into it. And Taya, she had Jordynne right where she wanted her, and that was in the corner. And Jordynne Grace was receiving Taya Valkyrie's knee strikes. Now, Jordynne was just so athletic, and she rolled out of the corner without being hit, but she still got speared by Taya Valkyrie, and the fans were behind both competitors. Now, Taya did a moonsault in the match, but afterwards she complained about her ribs, and it gave her some time to rest, as she was being seen by her husband, the Impact World Champion Johnny Impact, on the outside of the ring. Now, Taya just stayed on the outside of the ring too long. I mean, she was counted out of the match, and the referee had to count, so he continued to count, and she didn't get back in the ring, so she lost the match, but she kept the Knockouts Championship. Now, this caused Brian Cage to come to the entranceway, and he was coming after Johnny Impact, while Taya got back into the ring for Jordynne Grace to take Taya down. And Johnny Impact, he looked like a coward as Taya once again left the ring and acted as a human shield, standing in front of her husband, Johnny. Now, this was all while Brian Cage was still going after Johnny Impact, but out of nowhere you had Killer Kross attacking Brian Cage and putting him into a submission hold, and that's when Killer Kross threw Brian Cage into the steel post on the outside of the ring, and he was targeting Brian Cage's shoulders. So you had Killer Kross, he continued working on Brian Cage's arm with several submission holds, and as Killer Kross was dominating Brian Cage, he told Cage that he owns him. And later in the match, Brian Cage was down to only one arm because Kross damaged Brian Cage's other arm. And still with one arm available, Brian Cage was still a dangerous weapon. But as dangerous as he was, Brian Cage was unable to hit several of his moves, although he did manage to hit the F5. It was kind of a sloppy looking F5, but he did hit it. And again, the Impact World Champion Johnny Impact and the Knockouts Champion Taya Valkyrie came back to mess with Brian Cage, and Johnny just stood outside of the ring to distract Brian, while Taya punched Cage in the jewels. That had to hurt. And there was some miscommunication among the officials at Impact Wrestling. Some thought that there was a 2 count, but the ref claimed he counted to 3 during that pin that Kross delivered to Cage. And that's how Killer Kross earned himself the win. And at one point later on, Johnny Impact wrapped a chair around Cage's arm, and Johnny hit Brian Cage's arm with another chair. So we learned from Josh Matthews that the following week we would see Sami Callihan and Madman Fulton taking on Rich Swann and Willie Mack. And we were taken to the Undead Realm, and Rosemary, she was licking a butcher knife, and we saw Allie and Rosemary about to stare down. Now, Allie was wearing a collar, and Rosemary had control of that chain as she led Allie into this strange coffin, and I guess that's how they got into the Undead Realm. I mean, there's got to be a portal or something to get out there, and I guess it was through this coffin. Now, they met up with James Mitchell, who already had a wrestling ring all set up, and Rosemary was battling against this tall-looking guy. I'm not sure if that was Madman Fulton, I didn't get a good view. And there was all these monsters at ringside. I guess they were like lumberjacks, and this guy, he was given a metal wrench by one of the monsters at ringside, and he was about to use it on Rosemary, but she blinded him with this really bright light, and it said it was Rosemary using that wrench and knocking out this guy. So there was this tag team of monsters that just came into the ring, and they were swinging a metal ball and chain, and one of these guys managed to knock Rosemary down with this really strong lariat. But that was a big mistake because Rosemary, she just slashed this monster with a butcher knife as he was going to attack her with a sword. And suddenly Rosemary found herself outnumbered by all of these other monsters crawling into the ring. But Kiera Hogan showed up and tossed Rosemary a sword to even things up. And Rosemary used the sword in this 1080 degree as she sliced all the monsters down. And Rosemary kept telling Kiera not to enter the Undead Realm. but Kiera told Rosemary that she'd be with Rosemary until the very end, even though Rosemary told Kiera to stay at home. And then it was Su Yung that showed up, and it was like old times as Allie stood with Su Yung. And then there was a fight that broke out with Kiera Hogan and Rosemary taking on Allie and Su Yung. But at one point you had Allie, she tried to stab Rosemary with the sword, but Rosemary escaped this position just as Rosemary was about to slay Su Yung with that same sword. James Mitchell had Kiera Hogan in a vulnerable position. He was holding her pretty much hostage with some kind of object around her neck, and there was some guy in a robe that turned out to be none other than Kevin Sullivan telling Rosemary that she knows what's about to happen, and Rosemary reminded Kevin that they came for Allie's soul. But Kevin put Rosemary in her place, telling her that he runs the undead realm and that she's just some kind of a serpent. So just then, Rosemary was about to get attacked by Su Yung and her sharp metal claws. It looked like something out of Freddy Krueger right there. But for some reason, Allie got in the way like some secret service agent, and it was Allie that took the abuse. She took the damage. She took those metal claws right through her throat. Now, settle down, folks. I'm sure Allie's okay. She just signed a deal with AEW, and Kiera is being a good friend here. She went to check on her bleeding friend Allie, but first Kiera hit Su Yung with the wrench, and Rosemary was checking on Allie too. And Allie spoke for the first time in a while as she said that she was okay and that she's whole again, and I guess she's passed on. It seems like Impact Wrestling might have killed off her character, and this was her saying goodbye. But she'll be back in AEW, so we'll all see her over there. Now, we'll be talking about what happened at United We Stand right after these messages.
Man, this sucks. I can't go to the baseball game because I have to pack. We're moving next week and I have to get enough large boxes.
Did someone say oxes?
No, I said boxes. Ox's boxes are strong like an ox and durable for moving trips.
They're also biodegradable, which is just great for the environment. Download the Ox's Boxes app on your phone today, and your first box is free. And now we're offering same-day deliveries if you order before 4 p.m. on any given business day. Like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter.
Follow us on Twitter at TWL 24/7.
I'm not finished with you!
And now, let's get back to the show.
Hey everybody, this is Felix The Cat Katlovski, and this is Talk Wrestling Live on NorthCoastUnderground.com, where the Underground starts with you. And we're still talking Fear After Dark. This is Impact Wrestling. We just finished talking about Against All Odds. We were talking about how Rosemary went to this undead realm. She had control of Allie with the collar around her, and she was in control of the chain. She led her to this undead realm. They met up with Father James Mitchell. Father James Mitchell had a wrestling ring set up. They took on these different monsters. I mean, there was a guy that looked like Madman Fulton. Some other monsters came into the ring. They had ball and chains. We saw a metal wrench used. Even Rosemary sliced one of the monsters up with a butcher knife. We saw swords. I mean, it was crazy. It was really brutal, really violent. And we also saw Allie get killed off. She spoke for the first time in a long time, and she said that she's whole again, and I guess she was alluding to herself passing on because she had just been pierced through the throat by Su Young's metal claws. It looked like something out of Freddy Krueger, I told you. And that's how Impact Wrestling ended for the Against All Odds edition. And now we're about to talk about what happened the very next day on United We Stand, when that took place on April 4th in Rahway, New Jersey. So we all saw RVD, Rob Van Dam. He walked through the doors before the show, and he came to Impact Wrestling after spending time in the company during the Hulk Hogan years. So that's a long time since he's been gone in Impact Wrestling, and now he's back. We kicked off the show with an Ultimate X match with Dante Fox representing Lucha Underground, Pat Buck representing WrestlePro, Ace Austin, who was added to the match late because he had to replace Jack Evans from Lucha Libre AAA. I guess he just couldn't compete on the show. He might have had an injury. I'm not sure what his problems were, whether there was travel issues. And Johnny Impact, the world champion of Impact Wrestling, he decided to be in this match instead of representing Team Impact Wrestling because he didn't want to team with Brian Cage. Now, Dante Fox really impressed me in this match with a backflip from the ring apron, and then Ace Austin, he was diving from the top of the Ultimate X structure, and that was just insane. I mean, I know the fans wanted to see that, but do the fans really care about the well-beings of these guys, or do they just want to see the very next spot? Speaking of which, we had Pat Buck. He speared Jake Crist in the air, and Jake Crist did a cutter on Ace Austin, who was holding on to the Ultimate X wires above the ring. But that sent him back down. I mean, you know how gravity works. And just then you had the world champion, Johnny Impact. He saw an opportunity and quickly went for the X hanging above the ring. And Johnny got that X before anybody could stop him. So now, the Impact Wrestling World Champion is the #1 contender to the X Division title. So Johnny Impact is looking to become a dual champion. So Moose, Brian Cage, and Eddie Edwards, they were all together backstage. And Moose and Eddie Edwards, they looked like they were going to go at it. But Brian Cage, he tried to cool things down. And Eddie Edwards said that he had another partner since their team was a man down. And Moose warned Eddie that he better not be saying that his partner is Kenny the Kendo Stick. So it was time for Team Impact as Brian Cage, Moose, and Eddie Edwards took on Lucha Underground's Drago, Daga, Aerostar, and Marty the Moth. Now, Team Lucha Underground entered all together, while Team Impact Wrestling, they entered on their own. So I don't know if that's communication problems right there, or that's just the way that things work in Mexico. The team is okay with coming out all together, whereas in the US, I guess everybody comes out individually. But just then, Tommy Dreamer came to the ring, so I guess Team Impact filled all their holes, with Tommy Dreamer being the 4th member of the team that Eddie Edwards was probably talking about with that partner that he was alluding to. And everybody thought he was talking about Kenny the Kendo Stick, but it was Tommy Dreamer that became the partner. So Eddie Edwards and Tommy Dreamer, they really are an odd pair. I believe at one moment in this match, Tommy spit water out of his mouth into Eddie Edwards' mouth. I'm not sure what these guys do in their free time, but that was just gross. And Don Callis filled us in on a long list of diseases that you could get from drinking somebody else's water with germs included. So Team Impact, they looked to be on the same page, and everybody was helping each other out, being productive for the team, except when Moose stayed in the same place and didn't move on the ring apron. And he wasn't hurt or anything, he was just taunting. And then when he finally got into the ring, Moose speared his own partner, Brian Cage. So you have to wonder whether this was intentional, because Moose is buddies with Killer Kross, and those two work for Johnny Impact. So Moose was celebrating the attack, and I guess that confirmed everything was intentional. So Tommy Dreamer went after Moose with that kendo stick, and then Eddie Edwards went flying after Moose. And it's great that this team was taking care of internal issues, but this probably wasn't the place to be miscommunicating, because Lucha Underground's Marty the Moth took advantage and he pinned Tommy Dreamer as Team Impact lost, isolating itself, stemming from problems with Moose. So Taya wasn't happy that she had to defend her Knockouts championship against 3 other women, and she said that she saw what the company did to her husband, Johnny Impact, always making him defend his championship belt. And Taya saw how Johnny Impact won the Ultimate X match earlier in the night, and Taya was looking to get a win as well in her match. So Taya had to defend her championship in a 4-way match against Rosemary, Jordan Grace, and Katie Forbes. And what an entrance Katie Forbes had, sporting all those George Washington dollar bills on her ring attire as she was twerking. And Jordan Grace came out to the ring next, and Jordan, with a great wrestling portfolio, she secured a victory over Tessa Blanchard. Recently, Jordan Grace got a win over the Knockouts champion Taya Valkyrie. Now, all of the competitors began going after Rosemary at the same time, but they would eventually go their own way. And at some point, you had Su Yung. She came towards the ring, and Rosemary went after her on the ramp. And Jordan Grace delivered the Grace Driver on Katie Forbes, but Taya broke it up and picked up the pieces as she pinned Forbes to get the win and retain her Knockouts championship. Then you had Tessa Blanchard. She saw Taya as the Knockouts champion. It really had to piss her off, because if it wasn't for Gail Kim screwing Tessa at Homecoming, Tessa still could have been the Knockouts champion. And Tessa will see Gail Kim on April 28th at Rebellion, because Tessa isn't scared of Gail Kim or any woman or man, and that includes her opponent Joey Ryan for United We Stand, because Tessa is not afraid to knock out a man, and she was going up against a man, Joey Ryan, in that intergender match. So Tessa has a lot of guts, and she feels that she's ready for Joey Ryan. So Conan brought up what he's done for wrestling and Latino empowerment, and Conan name-dropped Low-Ki, a former ally of LAX, but they weren't on good terms, and I'm not quite sure how Low-Ki disrespected LAX, but Conan wasn't happy with Low-Ki, and he talked smack about Low-Ki's partner, Ricky Martinez, as Conan called him Ricky Martin. So some more disrespect right there. But I feel like it's really coming from Konnan, because I don't really see how Low-Ki did anything. He just pops up in Impact Wrestling, and Konnan saying he disrespected LAX, and I don't really see that. So now it was time for Impact Wrestling versus MLW when LAX took on Low-Ki and Ricky Martinez. So Low-Ki and Martinez, they make up the team of Promociones Dorado, and Low-Ki was on the very first episodes of Impact Wrestling going back to its NWA TNA days, but his team was not here to represent Impact Wrestling, with Ricky Martinez sporting that MLW t-shirt. Now, throughout the match, you had Low-Ki and Martinez. They managed to isolate their opponents and preventing them from making a tag, but eventually Ortiz did get the tag into Santana, and Low-Ki, he tried to go for a double stomp from the top onto Ortiz, but Santana knocked Ki off the turnbuckle. Now later in the match, you had Low-Ki and Martinez. They looked impressive with Martinez setting up the move, carrying Ortiz on his shoulders, only for Low-Ki to hit a springboard, and Martinez dropped Ortiz with that electric chair drop. So a great tag team combination, but Ortiz, he used his fast-paced energy to fight off Martinez, and Ortiz found the strength in him to hit a Death Valley driver on Martinez, and with the cover, LAX got the win. So now LAX can shift their focus back to the Lucha Bros, as both teams will be facing off at Rebellion on April 28th from Toronto, when the tag team championships are on the line. So Sami Callihan, he sent a video to Impact Wrestling to be aired during the live stream for United We Stand, as well as on social media. And it was a message to his opponent, Jimmy Havoc, in their Monsters Ball match. Callihan wanted to find out which of them was more aggressive and more violent. But the only thing that Callihan could guarantee that he was sure of was that there would be blood. So previously, Tessa Blanchard said that she could take on the men, and it all started at United We Stand, as she said she would treat her opponent, Joey Ryan, as her property. And I'm using less colorful terms than how Tessa described it, because you know that we can't say that on the radio. And then these two are polar opposites. Tessa is focused on her match. She's serious. She's determined to do whatever it takes to come out on top. Meanwhile, you have Joey Ryan, and he probably doesn't care if he'll end up on top or on the bottom. He's just here to have fun and entertain the fans. He'll go to raunchy lengths to do just that. And this Joey Ryan, he's the king of sleaze. He looks like an adult entertainment star with his mustache, and the guy rubs himself with baby oil and sucks on a lollipop. I mean, Joey took his used lollipop, he put it into the mouth of one of the fans, and I don't know what that fan was thinking, because Joey always keeps those lollipops in his Speedo. So Joey is so full of himself, and if he tries to play these games, Tessa will knock him back to reality. And Tessa looked disgusted when Joey Ryan was pouring and rubbing that lotion on himself before the match. Now Tessa flipped Joey the bird, so Joey wanted to introduce Tessa to his bird, and he wanted her to touch it. But Tessa wasn't going to take that, and Tessa played along with Joey, making him think that she was going to touch it. But instead, she faked him out as she flipped Joey by his chest hair, and Tessa had Joey in the corner, as we thought that Tessa was going to hit Joey in his sensitive spot, but instead, she stopped herself and went for a code breaker. And Joey then took out Tessa's arm by throwing her into that steel post from the ring apron. Now Joey kept working on that arm with an armbar submission hold. Even with one arm, Tessa nailed Joey with a dive to the outside of the ring, but how much did she hurt herself, taking that risky attempt? Tessa refused to give up, though, each time Joey would try to weaken her arm with submission holds. Now, if you know Tessa, expect her to allow herself to receive a broken arm rather than her tapping out herself, because Tessa has a high tolerance for pain. And then things got personal when Joey Ryan went for a German suplex, but Joey Ryan's arms were grabbing Tessa Blanchard by the chest to do this German suplex. So Tessa went personal as well, and she grabbed Joey Ryan by the jewels. But she applied a lot of pressure to make sure that Joey Ryan wasn't just going to enjoy himself. But it didn't even faze Joey Ryan. I mean, it's like he's used to this. And it's like he was just hulking up and getting even stronger while Tessa Blanchard held on to his jewels and applied that pressure, like I said. So Joey pulled out another used lollipop from his Speedo, and he wedged it into Tessa's mouth, and he super kicked her. Now Tessa was put in a vulnerable position on the top of the turnbuckle, and Joey was going to go for a superplex, but Tessa kicked him off. She hit the Magnum and a 3 count to defeat Joey Ryan. So Tessa managed to beat Joey Ryan with one arm, and now she can concentrate on Gail Kim, her opponent for Rebellion on April 28th. And Tessa blames Gail Kim, her involvement as a special guest referee, for costing her the Knockouts Championship when Tessa lost her championship to Taya Valkyrie back in January at Homecoming. Now then it was time for Rich Swann to defend his X Division Championship against Lucha Libre Triple A's Flamita. And initially, Rich Swann was supposed to defend his championship against Dragon Gate's Yamato, but instead, plans changed, maybe from, I don't know if it was visa issues or if it was just other travel issues, but Flamita, he's the replacement from Yamada, and Flamita is a 3rd generation wrestler, and he previously also wrestled for Dragon Gate as well. So the match began at a very fast pace with Flamita getting a handspring, but Rich Swann was charging at him, and later Rich Swann would slow it down, and the X Division champion tried to go for a submission move, but he couldn't get a good grip, and Swann should have kept to a faster pace because he's like the NBA's Golden State Warriors playing with speed when they are shooting 3-pointers non-stop. But when Swann slows things down, it doesn't always help him. And Rich Swann was not uncontested in the speed game, as Flamita can play that game as well, because he hit a 619 and he did a flip to the outside of the ring on Rich Swann. Flamita even went for an impressive looking 450 splash, but it just wasn't enough to put Rich Swann away. And Rich Swann wasn't able to finish Flamita with the cutter either. If Rich Swann could close the match out, he would rest easy until he would have to face Johnny Impact whenever the world champion cashes in his title shot for the X Division title. But if Flamita won, where would we see the X Division championship? I mean, fans must have been wondering whether we would see the X Division title defended in Lucha Libre Triple A in Mexico or in Japan. All these questions were up in the air. But Rich Swann, he hit the Phoenix Splash and he closed out the match. And all these questions were answered right there, with Rich Swann keeping his gold, keeping that X Division championship. So then we saw RVD and Sabu, and they had a backstage promo as they talked about their upcoming match against the Lucha Bros, and RVD reminisced on his career, talking about how he held the gold in ECW together with Sabu. But before the main event match, we still had Monsters Ball, with Sami Callihan taking on Jimmy Havoc. And Jimmy Havoc, he brought a staple gun and a long chain to the ring, and Callihan brought out a trash can and a metal baseball bat. So both of these guys are lunatics, so it's surprising that they aren't good old pals. Havoc looked like he was going to dive to the outside with a staple gun in his hands, and he would have dived onto Callihan, but instead you had Havoc, he stopped himself out of nowhere, and he pierced Callahan's chest with a staple. But then Havoc was shooting the staples at Callihan from a short distance. And Callihan better have worn a protective cup, because I don't know if he'll ever have kids with Havoc shooting staples at Callahan's jewels. Now maybe Callihan was trying to protect himself, but he broke the staple gun probably so Havoc couldn't use it on him. And then after all this violence, Callihan grabbed the ring bell to signal the start of the match, only to start throwing a chair at Havoc. And Havoc was busted open from taking a shot of the ring bell, and Callihan wrapped a chain around the mouth of Havoc, and he swung him into the ring post. And we saw the plastic garbage cans and aluminum garbage cans both used as weapons. And I think a fan yelled that this is unsanitary, and Havoc was losing a lot of blood, and he continued fighting, but he didn't have the strength to pile drive Callihan onto the ring apron. Callihan, on the other hand, he found the energy to do just that to Havoc. Callihan had his own stapler, and maybe that's why Callihan broke the staple gun earlier. And they battled for the stapler, but Havoc tried to go for a sunset flip with a pin, and that just wasn't the right time to go for it, as Havoc found another staple in his forehead, causing more blood to drip. And Callihan then stapled a wet newspaper to Havoc's arm. So if you're looking for the Cleveland Indians score, if they were playing that night, you might find it stapled to Jimmy Havoc's arm. And then again, it might have been a New Jersey sports team only, since the show did take place in New Jersey. But then again, Callihan did bring all these weapons from Ohio, so maybe the newspaper was locally from Ohio too. and Callahan stapled another newspaper to Havoc's forehead, and that might be a great place to advertise your locally owned business, right on the forehead of Jimmy Havoc. So everybody's going to see that on camera. So Callahan kicked Havoc in the private, and Callahan did tricks spitting a loogie up in the air and swallowing it as well. That was just gross. Then you had Chef Callahan. He was serving up some heavy metal as he whacked Jimmy Havoc with a frying pan. Callahan must have got thirsty, so he grabbed some lemons and he freshly squeezed them, but he wasn't making lemonade. Callahan used the freshly squeezed lemon juice on Havoc's bloody wounds, making the pain that much more painful from the acidity in the lemons. And Havoc found the lights turned out because he was stuck in a garbage can with Callahan hitting him with a chair. Havoc escaped the garbage can and found an empty cardboard box, and he used that cardboard box to give Callahan paper cuts on the corner of Callahan's mouth. Now, Callahan might want to audition for a role as Joker and ask how he got all these scars. Then you had Havoc expose Callahan's bare feet, and he continued to use the cardboard to give Callahan more paper cuts. And then we saw Havoc pouring salt into Callahan's wounds, and Havoc must have something for feet because he started biting Callahan's wounded feet, which was disgusting. And then even Legos were used as weapons in the match. Callahan delivered a pile driver on the Legos, connecting with Havoc's face, and it just wasn't enough to put him away. So Callahan looked like he was going for his baseball bat, but instead Callahan had several chairs set up, and he delivered the pile driver through them to take out Havoc, and that's how he got the win with the cover. Now, there was a brief sign of respect between both Callahan and Jimmy Havoc after a friendly fist bump. Remember, these two have been through battles and wars, like when they met last year at Wrestling MediaCon in the UK, but this time the blood was drawn on US soil after their match at United We Stand. With the finish of that match in the books, it was time for our main event, the Extreme Dream match, with Rob Van Dam and Sabu reuniting and returning to Impact Wrestling to face the Lucha Bros. Now, I made a bold prediction long ago that we might see the Young Bucks interfering in this match, and while that never happened, the match was still great to see. I mean, these were some of the best guys to come out of ECW to face one of the current hottest tag teams of wrestling, the Lucha Bros. Now, I saw Sabu bring his genie-looking girlfriend to AIW Wrestle Rager 3 over the summer, and Sabu brought her to accompany him to the ring in Impact Wrestling as well. So RVD's accolades were mentioned, from being an ECW World Champion to being a WWE World Champion, an Impact X Division Champion, and an Impact World Champion. And he's here to stay in Impact Wrestling, as he'll be back on Monday, April 29th, just a day after Rebellion on pay-per-view. So the match began with all the wrestlers taunting, and then Pentagon superkicked Sabu while RVD superkicked Phoenix, and we saw chairs used in their match and great tag team combinations used by both teams. One time, both Lucha Bros superkicked Sabu at the same time, and the guy just didn't know what hit him. I mean, he's being hit with the superkick from both sides. So while Sabu was trying to figure out what hit him, he can check out RVD's latest documentary, Headstrong, on the Fite app. And it looked like the Lucha Bros were going to put RVD and Sabu through a table, but the ECW legends fought them off, and it was like a time machine when RVD and Sabu both used a leg drop, putting their opponents through the table. It was a great moment, but it just wasn't enough to close out the match. But you want to know what did get the job done? It was when Pentagon and Phoenix worked together, hitting the Fear Factor on Sabu from the top, and then Pentagon hitting his spike pile driver, and that's what closed out the match with a successful pin. Now, showing signs of respect, like class athletes, both teams shook hands with their opponents as the show ended. So that's as far as I'm going to update you on Impact Wrestling for now. We're still playing catch up. Like I said, I haven't even seen WrestleMania for WWE yet. I'm still trying to catch up on a lot of wrestling, and in the next coming weeks, we'll try to get you all caught up with Impact Wrestling. So from Felix The Cat Katlovski on Talk Wrestling Live, thanks for joining us on NorthCoastUnderground.com, where the Underground starts with you.
You've been listening to Talk Wrestling Live. Listen live on Mondays at 4 p.m. on NorthCoastUnderground.com.
And follow us on Twitter at TWL 24/7.
Goodbye and good night, bad. Rest in peace.